Welcome back to Press Review In Depth. With reports of ISIS taking over Kurdish territories in northern Iraq following the withdrawal of Peshmerga troops and the exodus of Christians from Qaraqush, it appears as though the only group organised and willing enough to take on ISIS is now being pushed out of the region. Let's take a look at some press perspectives. A Reuters article reports on the Kurds' attempts to lobby Washington following the capture of several Peshmerga-controlled towns. The article says with high-powered lobbying firms and a savvy media campaign in Washington, the Kurds are pressing hard for US money and guns to meet short-term needs and support for their longer-term goal of a sovereign state in the mountains of northern Iraq. But the article adds American officials insist their commitment to a unified Iraq has not changed, despite the routing of government forces by radical Sunni militants of the Islamic State. The article adds Khalilzad, the US ambassador in Iraq from 2005 to 2007, recommended a two-pronged US strategy, press Baghdad to pursue efforts to form a united government, but at the same time prepare for possible failure which could lead to Kurdish autonomy. The article says the best result would be a decentralised Iraq with a federal system in the Arab-majority areas, operating in confederation with Kurdistan, he said in a recent New York Times article. The article adds the region's drive for economic independence depends in part on oil pumped from beneath Kurdistan. It was dealt a blow last month when Baghdad intervened in a US court to block a Kurdish shipment of crude oil headed for Texas. Kurdistan began to threaten Baghdad's economic clout at the end of last year when it completed a pipeline of its own through Turkey to the north and began sending its own crude out to the world via the Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. The article concludes the weekend defeat of their forces by Islamists north of the city of Mosul damaged the region's image as an island of stability in the chaos of Iraq, and the Kurds are now accepting help from the Iraqi Air Force to fight the shared enemy. An article in Time magazine says that Kurdistan isn't about to leave Iraq amid the ISIS fighting. The article says many Kurds long for an independent Kurdistan, but only in Iraq has the dream come close with the formation of an autonomous region. As the issue of autonomy became more of a reality, unable to sell oil abroad and with a diminished budget, the thinking goes, the Kurds will secede to expand their economic options. The article says the Kurdish regional government president Masoud Barzani has called for an independence referendum, but at the same time, more quietly, he's been overseeing negotiations to send Kurdish politicians to Baghdad to help form a new Iraqi government. The KRG is pursuing a dual-track policy, bargaining to stay part of Iraq on more advantageous terms while also developing the option of secession. The article adds the idea that Iraq's losses to ISIS will be the Kurds' gains in terms of statehood is a shallow one. ISIS poses a grave risk to Kurdistan's hard-won security and could thwart Kurdish efforts to build an independent state. The article adds Kirkuk's status has been contested for decades and its competing communities are unlikely to give it up to an independent Kurdistan without a fight. Perhaps most crucially, the fate of Kirkuk's oil remains to be decided. And the article adds regional and international interests also confine the Kurds. Iraqi Kurdistan is a landlocked region with powerful neighbours who've long been masters at power plays across borders. Iran and Turkey are opposed to Kurdish independence, fearing that their own restive Kurdish populations may be inspired by the Iraqi Kurds' example. The article concludes Iraq is a failing country. The Kurds are better off than the rest of the country, but their own weaknesses and limitations curb their chances of triumphantly breaking away from it until and unless there is no longer an Iraq to break away from. Well, joining us now to discuss is Kurdish rights activist Mark Campbell, who blogs under the name Havalo. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Hi, Karen. Yeah, thank you for having me.
A lot of people are talking about the fact that events in Gaza have diverted attention away from ISIS in Kurdistan. Do you think that the international community will now be drawn back to the issue of the expansion of ISIS and the encroachment on Kurdish territory?
Well, I hope very much that they are. For the last 2 years, ISIS have been already encroaching on Kurdish territory in the north of Syria, in what the Kurds call Rojava. the Kurds there have been battling them already for 2 years, and now, as you know, with this, I mean, historically biblical sort of epic events that are going on now in Sinjar and in that whole area, with ISIS are spreading their areas basically, and I mean, really horrific. I don't know what you've already been seeing or hearing, but there's just such heart-wrenching, heart-rending pleas from Yazidis in that area to for people, you know, for people, one, to cover this issue, but really to, you know, to halt this genocidal attacks by ISIS on this people who, you know, this is one of the most ancient religions. The Yazidis in Kurdistan are one of the, you know, one of the holders of the original character and culture of the Kurds in general in Kurdistan. So by attacking the Yazidis, I mean, ISIS are attacking the very heart of Kurdish people, basically. You know, that they're attacking all of the Kurds, and what that is doing is actually, on a positive side, a little bit like Mosul, it's uniting many of the Kurdish parties who, you know, who for the last 2 years have been at loggerheads. I mean, Kurdish parties from Syria, like the PYD and the armed resistance of YPG, have now crossed over the border and are joining the Kurdish Peshmerga in the north to help them resist against ISIS. And now I saw a tweet this morning that Kurdish resistance fighters from Iran are also crossing the border to protect the Kurdish people in this area. It's very, very worrying. And overnight this Christian town as well, which has now fallen. So I mean it's not a case. I mean, it is now the most important issue in the whole of the Middle East. And if the media don't turn to it, I mean, this is a threat that is going to only get larger and will threaten not just the whole of the Middle East, but it has the potential to destabilize, you know, I mean, God knows. I mean, I don't know what you think, but...
And, yeah, I mean, it did seem as though the Kurdish Peshmerga troops were the only group strong enough to counter ISIS in the region. Do you think that the West will now see the Kurdish groups, if they unite, as allies in the region against ISIS and extremists?
Well, that's what that's what a lot of analysts in American think tanks are writing about and saying about. You know, that the Kurds. I mean, it gets a little bit of a complicated issue because there's many different parts of Kurdistan. I mean, Kurdistan was divided in 1923 after the Lausanne Treaty, and there's 4 different parts. So there's Kurdistan, which is occupied by Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, as the Kurds see. So, I mean, the Kurds that you're talking about when you talk about the Peshmerga are the Kurds from northern Iraq or South Kurdistan, who were very strong allies of the Americans during the Gulf War and since, actually. So they are the natural allies, yes. I mean, but even them, even the most natural ally, you know, of America in terms of the Kurdish fighters, and there seems to be a problem with you know, with both in terms of media coverage and also in terms of weapons or aid or anything at the moment.
And as you mentioned, there were attacks on the small Yazidi community. There may have been the conception among some, I read in Time magazine just now, that there may have been the conception that ISIS gains could lead to more autonomy for a Kurdish region, freedom from an oppressive central Iraqi government.
I mean, that was the thinking of the President Barzani and the ruling party, the KDP, after ISIS took over Mosul. I mean, that was exactly the thoughts that, well, perhaps, you know, because of the occupation of Mosul by, you know, the whole disintegration of the Sykes-Picot. ISIS have done this, although, yes, they're horrible and they behead people and everything, but maybe this has created an opportunity for Kurdish self-determination.
Do you think...
But now, actually, I mean, the Kurds are starting to realize, no, they're not just going to stop at Mosul. You know, they're actually encroaching now into Kurdistan. So that argument falls away, because now ISIS are a sort of an existential threat to Kurdistan itself.
You don't think there could be any chance of an agreement between Kurdish leaders and the ISIS?
Well, not at this stage. We can. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, without going into all the conspiracies and scenarios that, you know, are literally, you know, making their ways around the place. It's just the air is full of conspiracies, and you know, at the moment, I mean, the KDP, the ruling party of KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, are adamant that they are going to fully take on and fight ISIS and to defeat them. And in the meantime, the YPG, the people who really have been fighting ISIS for the last 2 years, the Kurdish freedom fighters from what the Kurds call Rojava, Western Kurdistan, they are heavily engaged with ISIS around Sinjar. And they are also trying to aid the refugees up in the mountains who've been without food and water for 4 or 5 days, and many of them have died. And you know, it's expected that many more hundreds are going to die if nobody can get to them, because ISIS are surrounding that whole mountain. So agreement, not at the moment. No, it's full-scale war. I mean, it is full-scale war between all the Kurdish forces and ISIS at this present time, and the Kurds are calling for help from the West.
And there was, if I may just interrupt, there was a suggestion that the secession of the Kurdish regional government was a plan B for its president, Masoud Barzani, and the deciding factors were economic and oil related.
Say that one more time, sorry.
I said that there were suggestions that the secession of the Kurdish regional government was a plan B for Mr. Barzani, and that the deciding factor was economic and oil related. Do you think now all of that has just gone out of the window and it's merely a fight for survival for the people of Kurdistan? Yeah,
it's a fight for survival at the moment. I mean, all that was coming to pieces anyway, because you know, there was the whole issue of the oil, that the Iraqi government had withdrawn certain funds for oil from the Kurdistan regional government, and so then the Kurdistan regional government had felt it legitimate to take their own oil out through the oil pipelines to Ceyhan through Turkish pipelines, and then they've been taking their tank. This is a whole thing that's been going on literally just before this, and there was about 5 oil tankers all sort of circling around the seas trying to find buyers, and it was all sort of shrouded in mystery about who, if anybody, was going to buy this oil, because Iraq was threatening to legally challenge any buyer of this oil. So that was already a problem that seemed to be, that was hitting problems already. So I think now, I mean, it's many commentators, when they talked about Mosul, they sort of, we're in a sort of, history is being made, and we're in a post-Mosul situation. I think now we're in a post-Sinjar situation where everything is up in the air and everything is changing, and anything really is now is now possible.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Mark.
Yeah. No. Thank you, thank you for your interest in this. In this issue, it's really important. That it is taken up by the international media.
Thanks very much,
as quickly
Mark.
as possible. Thank you.
For more updates, please visit levant.tv and subscribe to MidEast In-Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.